nomination inside the Excel Center last night. Nearly 400 people were being arrested on the streets of St. Paul, bringing the total number of convention-related arrests to more than 800. On Thursday afternoon, several hundred anti-war protesters had rallied at the state capitol about 5 p.m. when their protest permit expired. They tried to march to the convention center, but in one of the largest shows of police force during the Republican convention, hundreds of riot police arrived on the scene, backed by snow plows, horses, and dump trucks to seal off downtown from the demonstrators. The protesters continued walking, tried to cross several bridges that span Interstate 94 into downtown St. Paul. As night fell, police turned to harsher tactics. They fired concussion grenades, smoke bombs, pepper spray into the crowd. The march ended with more than 200 demonstrators trapped on the Marion Street Bridge, with hundreds of police and riot gear blocking either side. The protesters were forced to sit on the tarmac with their hands on their heads. The police then moved in and arrested everybody, including more than a dozen members of the media. Among them, Rick Rowley of Big Noise Films and Democracy Now! Producer Sharif Abdel-Qaddous, who'd been arrested on Monday as well, while covering a separate protest. Rick and Sharif were cuffed, detained for about an hour and a half before being released and issued a citation for unlawful assembly. I arrived on the scene from the convention center as they were being released. I saw Ramsey County Sheriff Bob Fletcher nearby. I asked him about their arrests. Sheriff Fletcher, are these misdemeanors?
Well, yes, they are.
Can I just ask, how is the press expected to function in St. Paul?
Well, you'll have to ask Chief Harrington. The arrests were made by the St. Paul Police Department, and this is the way that they chose to resolve the issue of the press being there. The city attorney's office will have to make the decision as to whether people are charged or not, but as you can see, we've released the press as quickly as possible, and most everyone else will be going down to the jail.
But they were released and charged with misdemeanors. They get a record for trying to cover a protest.
You understand how the system works. The St. Paul Police Department made the arrest, and we're the detention facility, and we have a choice as to how we want to detain and process, but we do not have a choice regarding the citation. The citation will be, it has Commander Steve Frazier's name. He was the incident commander at the time, and the arrest is pursuant to his decision.
Were any other reporters released?
Well, you know, you find that out, you call me, and if that's the case, you know, we'll certainly talk to Chief Harrington and say if someone was treated in a different way, they should receive a citation. It won't be difficult to issue a citation under those circumstances. But nobody got hurt.
But as a well, I think the Constitution got hurt. When reporters are cited with misdemeanors, when they're peacefully there covering protests, we've come in from out of town to cover a major national event, which is the convention.
And you realize that I'm talking to you because I've always believed that every elected official should be accessible and answer questions. You should never avoid them. But I can't answer all your questions because the St. Paul Police Department made the arrest.
Ramsey County Sheriff Bob Fletcher speaking last night as our own reporters were released, producer Sharif Abdel-Qaddous of Democracy Now! And Rick Rowley of Big Noise Films, among other reporters. Sharif joins us now after a sleepless night. Sharif, once again, I mean, on Monday, as you were covering the protest with Nicole Salazar, yet another protest, you were arrested. And you still face felony riot charges for covering that protest. Now you went off to this next protest. Explain exactly what happened.
Well, I was with Rick Rowley. He had the camera. We were at the protest for several hours. It kept moving along. They wanted to march to the Excel Center, but they were banned from doing that. They had a permit to until 5, but you know that's before any of the delegates show up at the Excel Center, so it's kind of a meaningless protest. So they continued after their permit had expired. They kept trying to cross, but it really was a big show of force by the police. You saw these snow plows for the first time, a lot of horses, a lot of policemen on bicycles, and they kept blocking each bridge. And the march would move on. They'd block the bridge, and there'd be a lot of coordination among the police. Eventually, the march ended up on a back street, and it started getting darker, and that's when the police resorted to harsher tactics. They threw a lot of concussion grenades, a lot of smoke bombs, pepper spray, some tear gas, and the crowd was kind of dispersing. And
And you were where in all of this?
We were everywhere. I was basically buddying up with Rick to help him film. In these situations, you need someone to come to watch the camera person's back, and so I was helping him. Sometimes we're at the police line when the concussion grenades were being thrown. We're actually next to where the police were. At other times, it'd be with the protesters. So we're just filming the entire scene to get a sense of what's happening.
When did they arrest you?
Well, after the concussion grenades were thrown, the police basically corralled everyone onto the Marion Street Bridge, about 200 people. As soon as we were on the bridge, we realized that we were trapped. They had a line of riot cops on one side, a line of riot cops on the other, and the marchers had nowhere to go. Mind you, a lot of these marchers were, at that point of the night, saying, I want to get out of here, I want to go home, while the smoke bombs are being thrown, but at that point there was no opportunity to leave. And once everyone was on the bridge, I stood up on the railing with Rick, who was filming. They told everyone to sit down, to put their hands on their heads. Everyone complied. And let me just say from the start, this was a very non-confrontational group of people who were doing this march. Every time riot police would form a line, they would simply turn and try and go to another bridge. They never pushed the cops. They never did anything like that. It was a very compliant group of protesters, if you will. And so once they were told to sit down, everyone did. They sat down with their hands on their heads. I tried to stay up with Rick to try and discern ourselves that we're filming the scene. But
you have all your press credentials.
Right, I had my Democracy Now! Press pass and my RNC pass, which actually is the one that got me off easier than I would have if I didn't have that one. Because when we were told to sit down over a megaphone, we did. And slowly the cops walked up. I held out my pass. I said, we're journalists. And we're sitting amongst a group of about maybe 6 or 8 other camera people, sound people, and clearly all press.
Local networks, what, NBC?
There was Channel 4 there.
CCO?
I forgot the call letters. But there was a bunch of clearly that were all journalists there. The first row walked up of cops. I said, I'm a journalist, I'm press, I'm here filming. He goes, well, you shouldn't be here, you should have dispersed. He arrested me. So once we were sitting down, Rick and I were sitting with our cuffed behind our back for about an hour.
With your hands cuffed behind your back?
Not tightly, not like the first day, but still cuffed. And I was speaking to the police, and he goes, why don't you guys just disperse when we tell you to disperse, and this is not going to happen. I told him, you've been telling me to disperse since 5 p.m. And so, there'd be no press for 4 hours of this march. We're just doing our job. We're not going to disperse whenever you tell us to. We're going to continue to do this. Eventually, I told him to keep checking with his superiors, to keep calling it in that he had media, and he did it. And he let us not board the bus to the prison, but we eventually were driven off to a parking lot where I called you in a van, and they dropped us off, and I got a citation for unlawful assembly. And
we'll see what that means exactly, whether you now will be charged with this misdemeanor of unlawful assembly, leaving you with a record. We'll continue to ask, and I understand there's going to be a gathering of people at City Hall to hand in tens of thousands of names on a petition today calling for freedom of the press in St. Paul.
Oh, let me just say on a funny note, I was just sitting there, and he'd have to fill out all these forms when they arrest you. And so he said, this may seem like a curious question, but what ethnicity do you consider yourself? So I said, I'm Arab American, and he looked at a sheet and he's like, I don't have a box for that. So he said, would you consider yourself African? So I said, well, Egypt's in Africa. And then he just got all confused. I said, just check other, man. Don't worry about it. It was a funny moment.
So here you have Sharif Abdel-Quddus, just another reporter, getting arrested in St. Paul, trying to cover this, what they call the national security event, the Republican National Convention. Well, as I interviewed Ramsey County Sheriff Bob Fletcher, he blamed a group of 400 to 500 alleged anarchists for creating unrest in St. Paul over the past week. Fletcher also admitted local police authorities have infiltrated and spied on local activists, including members of the RNC Welcoming Committee, for over a year.
Let's cut to the quick in this whole discussion. Our organization has been tracking the activities of anarchist organizations throughout the United States now for the past year. We have dozens of anarchist groups that are here. and I would estimate probably about somewhere between 400 and 500 individuals from those affinity groups. And those are the 400 that are really causing problems for everyone. The first day, that first Monday, we knew what their tactics were going to be. They were brazen about it. They made no bones about their attempt to blockade streets. And if you were downtown and you saw imagine you're a delegate on a bus and they mob the bus and break the windows. If you're walking through downtown and you see Macy's get their windows broken, or the First Bank, there were a lot of brazen criminal acts, and it's a very small faction. I will tell you that of the 10,000 protesters there on Monday, we were talking about 400 that were really troublesome. But those same 400 are still in town, and when they get cranked up and decide to do some damage, they can. And so the city police department decided, after several observations of people with weapons, people with feces and urine in the crowd, that this was the type of, there were enough individuals in the crowd that could cause problems, that some action had to be taken. And so I don't think you can police always for the best in the crowd. You have to police for the worst in the crowd.
You mentioned you knew these 400 roughly who came in from around the country. How did you know them? How did you track them?
Well, when I say we know them, we followed our welcoming committee members to many cities around the country. We consulted with the terrorism task force in those cities. We received information, etc. But as they started arriving, we were able to identify those that were here.
In what ways?
Well, a variety of investigative ways that we did that.
Did you have infiltrators?
Yes, we did.
That was Ramsey County Sheriff. We also asked him if those infiltrators were paid, and he said yes. That was Ramsey County Sheriff Bob Fletcher. Well, on Wednesday, prosecutors formally charged 8 members of the RNC Welcome Committee with conspiracy to riot and furtherance of terrorism. The 8 activists are believed to be the first people ever charged under the 2002 Minnesota version of the Federal Patriot Act. The activists face up to 7.5 years in prison. On Thursday, other members of the RNC Welcoming Committee spoke to the media for the first time. The group, along with the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign, held a news conference at their convergence space to discuss their group and the charges against the so-called RNC8.
My name is William Gillis. That's William, G-I-L-L-I-S. I've been organizing with the Welcoming Committee for the last 2 years, and I am, in fact, an anarchist. I believe that government is organized crime. I want to see a world of anarchy without domination, without thugs, without warlords, without tyrants, and without politicians. And as an American, I believe in actively resisting those who would rule us all. The brutality and the lies of the state this week are not a surprise, but they are still deplorable. Police kick down doors with guns drawn on families with their children at dinner time. Reporters and the media at large have been repeatedly targeted for repression. Activists have been abducted off the street in unmarked vans, and political prisoners held without access to medical attention. The state has never really bothered with ethical justifications for its violence, but now we see that the agents of the law don't even bother with internal consistency, ignoring the few rights they have pledged not to violate. Sheriff Bob Fletcher has unleashed a degree of repression that should embarrass and anger us all.
My name is Nancy Rosh Gilman. That's R-A-A-S-C-H-G-I-L-M-A-N. I'm a lifelong resident of St. Paul, and I am a nonviolence trainer. I've been working extensively in the global justice movement since 1999, and I have been doing training and activism for social change since 1978, so 30 years now. I want to pick up on what Celia said about there are no terrorists up here. There are no terrorists in the Ramsey County Jail. There are terrorists in the Excel Center. There are terrorists in the White House. And that's why we organized these protests. The house raids that we saw in Minneapolis and St. Paul this week are very similar to the house raids that have been carried on by our Marines in Iraq and in Afghanistan and in other places around the world. the government cannot carry on a repressive foreign policy without it coming home to roost in the United States as well, and that's what we're seeing this week. Not only in the repression that's been targeted towards us, but more generally, ongoingly, we have the conditions that are caused by the neoliberal agenda: lack of affordable health care, criminalization of immigration, and gentrification of New Orleans instead of true reconstruction and returning New Orleans to the people who used to live there before the hurricane. So when the people who are directly responsible for these acts of abuses of power come to the Twin Cities, to my hometown of St. Paul, I need to speak up. I owe it to my friends in other countries. I owe it to the people of New Orleans. I owe it to Native Americans. I owe it to everyone. And that's what I've done. I have a responsibility here. Now, my age and my background would have probably led me to organize with the coalition to march on the RNC and Stop the War, which had a legal, permitted, peaceful march on Monday. And I personally feel very happy that that march happened. I feel proud that 10,000 people marched in the streets of my town, St. Paul, in protest of the Republicans. And I'm very glad that went off well. I made a personal choice not to organize with the coalition to march on the RNC and Stop the War. Rather, I chose to organize with the Welcoming Committee. And I've been doing that for 18 months. I believe in my capacity and my identity as nonviolence trainer and as pacifist. I believe that the limits of what we talk, the kinds of tactics that we talk about when we think of nonviolent direct action need to expand. We need to escalate in view of the rather serious crisis that our country is facing. We need to improve our ways of non-cooperation. We need to take it further than it has been taken so far, and that's why I organized with the RNC Welcoming Committee. I'm interested in expanding and improving the kind of nonviolent direct action that we do.
My name is Shamako Noble. I'm president and executive director of Hip Hop Congress, and I'm also a member of the Poor People's Economic Human Rights Campaign. S-H-A-M-A-K-O. Last name, N-O-B-L-E. We're not out here because we just want to complain. We're not out here because we just want to create chaos or ruckus. We're out here because people are dying. People are dying. This is not a game. Why does everyone think this is a game? Why do these politicians think this is a game? Why does the sheriff think this is a game? Why does the mayor think this is a game? This is not a game. Quote me on that. This is as real gets. They are manipulating. They are lying, they are cheating, and unfortunately, they are using the media as their pawns to do so. And we can only go so far. We can only write a press release so well. That's right. We can only craft our message so clearly. At one point, there's not much more we can do. Now, I think I've said this in 2 different press conferences, and I'll say it one more time because it doesn't seem like it's sinking in. We're in a country that has the and believe me, I just want to clarify something. I'm a proud American. I love America. I've been all over this country. I love the people of America. I love the people over here. They're Americans. I know you might not like that. It might bother you. But they're just as much a part of our country as anybody else. So this is not some sort of anti-American, oh, I'm all upset kind of commentary here. But the reality of the situation is that we are in a country with a history of political repression. It's very, I mean, I'm not making this up. You know what I mean? Like there's an entire and I'm not trying to detract from what happened today either. But if you think that what's happening today is separate from the entire history of this country, I don't know what to tell you. I don't even know what I can do with that. Because the reality of the situation is, you only have to ask yourself one simple question. Who has the power and the legacy to put $50 million on the table to put fences all around the streets of a city that the people have paid for? Period.
interesting that after hearing everything that's been said, the questions are about violence on the protesters' side, when really the hurt that was done in the streets, I mean, did any of the protesters shoot rubber bullets at the police? Did any of the protesters fire concussion grenades at human beings to explode right next to them? I mean, I think that the questions here are way off, and people aren't looking in the right place. That's all.
The definition of violence itself is very slippery. In some cases, property destruction is considered violence, and in some cases it's not considered violence by the very people that I work with the most closely in the peace and justice community. The definition of violence itself is slippery. Second point, tactical innovation that I spoke about before for nonviolent direct action is not going to come from the center. It's not going to come from the folks who have been organizing marches and rallies and doing a good job of it and doing it well. It's not, but they're not the innovators. The innovators are the people who are dissatisfied with that model. And that's the people in the welcoming committee, and that's the people we invited to come here. I can tell you that I personally did not and probably wouldn't smash the Macy's window. But I'm not going to condemn the person who did it.
Why?
I don't know what's going to come of this. I think that I think that there's a good expression, a good argument that capitalism is a problem. Macy's is a capitalist. I personally find capitalism a real problem.
News conference of the RNC8. During it, a 19-year-old activist named Elliot Hughes said he was beaten and tortured inside the Ramsey County Jail.
My name is Elliot Hughes, ELLIOTHUGHES. Me and some friends were chanting for so that we could receive food in Ramsey County Jail because we hadn't been provided food. And 6 or 7 officers came into my cell, and they took one officer punched me in the face right here where you see this bruise, and then they slammed and I fell to the ground unconscious, and the officer grabbed me by the head, slammed my head on the ground, and reawoke me out of to consciousness, and I was bleeding everywhere. They dragged me to another detaining cell. They put a bag over my head that had a gag on it, and they used pain compliance tactics on me for about an hour and a half. They separated my jaw as hard as they could with their fingers, and they bent my ankles back. They basically bent my foot backwards. I was screaming for God and screaming for mercy, crying, asking them why they're doing this, and I've never been so violated in my life.
That was 19-year-old Elliot Hughes speaking at a news conference on Thursday. Sheriff Bob Fletcher told the Star Tribune that Hughes was, quote, extremely disruptive in jail, and that, quote, it took some force to control him. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, breaking with convention. War